Good afternoon and welcome to the session. My name's James George and I'm from the MacArthur Foundation and I'll be your host this afternoon. When we take a circular economic perspective around business and think in terms of system level change, it's really easy to get focused in on the largest organizations within our economies, the largest engines within our economies. But of course, they only make up part of the solution. What about the sources of great disruptive technology? New and innovative business models that can disrupt the status quo. This is where the emerging innovator or the small business community comes in. So this afternoon, what we're going to look at is how do small businesses implement the circular economy? And I'm really pleased to be joined this afternoon by three very different arbiters of the circular economy. We have William Neale from the Environment Directorate General of the European Commission, John Atcheson, CEO and founder of Stuffstr, and Natalia Agathou from the London Waste and Recycling Board. Good afternoon to you all.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here.
Of course, if you're joining us online this afternoon, this is very much your session as well. We've got a team of folks behind the scenes who are taking your questions. So if at any point you want to jump into some of these conversations, submit your questions through the various platforms, and we'll put those to our guests as the conversation develops. So before we get started, let's start by understanding a little bit more about who our guests are. John, I'd like to start with you if we can first. Stuffstr, who are you?
Yes, who in the world is Stuffstr? So we're a startup company, been focused on circular economy from the start. Our vision is no unused stuff. And so what we focus on is making sure that everything that's produced is used fully and then repurposed and used again. And we do it through partnering with retailers so that we provide an instant buyback platform so that they can say to their customers, anything you buy from us, we'll buy it back as soon as you're done, regardless of condition, to get people into this mindset of being in a kind of circular flow.
Excellent, thanks. So if we zoom out a little bit more to the city level, Natalia, what does LWARB do in this context?
So the London Waste and Recycling Board is an organisation that sits basically between the Mayor of London and the 33 boroughs across London. And we are basically have been formed as a partnership between those two parties in order to help London become a low carbon circular economy city, either through increasing recycling or reducing waste, basically, and working with a range of stakeholders to make that happen.
Excellent. And then finally to you, William, at the European Commission. I think everyone knows who that is, but specifically in your day-to-day role, what does that mean with the context of this conversation?
Well, like you say, I'm a bureaucrat these days working in the European Commission. I'm from Britain, so I'm one of the rare survivors working for the European institutions. I worked for 13 years in the private sector and including in the social enterprise sector, and I've worked for 20 years in the European Commission. Now I'm working in the Environment Directorate General, but on a fairly horizontal way, working with a lot of the other parts of the European Commission, dealing with agriculture, industry, consumer rights, and so on. And in 2012, I brought Ellen MacArthur over to speak to about 90 colleagues, senior management in the Commission. And that was really setting the ball rolling. In 2014, I was one of the people coordinating our first circular economy strategy. And as I'll explain a bit later, we're about tomorrow to adopt a new 5-year strategy for circular economy.
Excellent. Thanks, William. So if we stick with you for a moment then, and let's start drilling into that a little bit. You know, with organizations like John's, what is the work that you're doing that helps support the advancement of circular economic businesses at the small to medium level?
Well, as an institution covering 27 countries, we're dealing a lot with those member states. And it's quite difficult in many cases to get to the level of the individual entrepreneur. And many of the business organizations that are represented here are often the bigger businesses. And it's often, if they are smaller businesses, they're well-established ones that are in European federations, composed of national federations, and we quite often get a bit of a lowest common denominator approach, not necessarily the the most dynamic and disruptive enterprises. But what we do is we try to make sure that the systems work, the framework, the market, and make sure that the investment is happening. So maybe in the last 50 years or so, we've had an approach which has been based in environment policy on punishing polluters, on waste legislation, on chemicals legislation, and so on. Since 2014 or so, we've moved more to an approach which is a balance of enterprise and industry policy and environment policy, which is using the single market tools that we have. So things like eco-design, which is legislation which dictates the minimum performance levels for products that you're allowed to put on the European market, using standards, using the collective consumer power that we have in Europe to actually say that what we want on our markets has to meet those minimum standards, including circularity in design, for example. We're trying to improve the markets for secondary raw materials, boost the amount of recycled content in products. We're trying to improve consumer information and consumer rights, and also things like the competition rules and the trade rules and so on, trying to make sure that that framework is working well for circularity and for small business. But that's the sort of framework conditions. We're also, and it's the sort of minimum requirements, we're also trying to help the top runners and the more innovative companies. We have programs like COSME, which is the program for small and medium-sized enterprises. We have our research programs like Horizon. We have other tools like the eco-label, the EU eco-label, which is a trustworthy and verifiable label for environmentally friendly and circular products. We have green public procurement criteria, these kind of things which are aimed at not keeping the worst off the market, but really making sure that the best get the market rewards. We also have investment tools. So we have now we have a European Green Deal investment plan as part of our new European Green Deal. We have regional and structural funding. We have research funding, as I said. We go through organizations like the European Investment Bank, which has a big circular economy fund now. And we're also establishing criteria for what you can actually call green or circular in an investment fund, so that we can make sure that the funding is also going to those companies. We're calling that the taxonomy, which is rather new. We're working with coordinating member states on their approaches to circular economy. We have about 12 or 13 member states now that have their own circular economy strategies. And we're working directly with stakeholders where we can. And I would encourage anybody that's watching this to go to our circular economy stakeholder platform, which is a virtual platform where you can sort through by country, by sector, by size, by all kinds of criteria, and find good examples of circular business.
Well, William, not only being the only Brit left in the European Commission, almost sounds like you're the busiest Brit in the European Commission as well, with all that going on. I wonder, Natalia, how does that, hearing from William then, how does that influence the work you do at the city level? Does it influence it, or actually are you drawing out your own threads and strands from what you're seeing on the ground?
I think we are looking at the European Commission still to get inspired and make sure we are in line with what our peers are doing across other countries in Europe. So I think there's the EREC network as well, which is the network for resource efficiency, and any provider of support to small, medium companies is featuring there. So SMEs can easily know who can support them in their trajectory to become circular across the different European countries. So we are very much in line and in contact and communication with our European counterparts. And I think what we have done in London is starting from the roadmap that we launched back in 2017 as a city of how London can become a circular city. We identified around 100 practical actions and commitments, and one of them was to design a dedicated bespoke support system for SMEs to be supported in that process, to either transition to more circular business models, or to the ones who already had a circular DNA, like Stuffstr and another 200, 300, and so that I'm going to talk about, help them scale, grow, amplify their impact, reach the markets they need, access the capital they need to grow. So that is, I'm sitting here representing the Advanced London program, the support program that has been supporting 200 and so businesses. But we have also launched, we did an accelerator program last year dedicated to the built environment. And through that, we helped for a period of 6 to 7 months, intensively 6 SMEs in the built environment to scale, grow, pivot, and get to a final product that will actually resonate with the market that they are trying to enter. And we also invest in different funds. So we don't do direct investment, but we have been an institutional investor for Circularity Capital, the first circular economy fund, Sustainable Ventures here in London. And there is also the Greater London Investment Fund. That's part of the European Investment Bank, has invested in that fund. The Mayor of London has invested in that together with some part of our money. And we have ring-fenced actually 14 million in that fund for circular small businesses in London.
So it pays to be in London as a small business trying to adopt a circular economic agenda.
You have no way out. You have no excuse not to do it. That's
Well,
the key. That's the key conclusion.
Right.
That's
We
really
are there to support them, and yeah.
That's a really interesting point then. So John, be it at the European level all the way down to the City of London, it sounds like this is all wrapped up, right? Like
No, it is. No, it's autopilot. We just push a button and everything happens.
But come on,
No,
there must be some realities there as a circular entrepreneur trying to change the infrastructure around you. How do you find this during your journey?
Sure. Well, I mean, circular economy is still a growing idea, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of players think they might have some idea of what it is, but they don't really know for sure. And then that affects us across a whole range of elements of our business. I should say from the start that Advanced London has been actually really helpful to us, both from investor introductions, looking at grant opportunities that we could step into, and also even helping us in finding ways to recycle responsibly some of the things that we can't sell through our system. So that infrastructure actually is really, really helpful. But there are a lot of challenges, and I think for us, as with all startups, funding is always a challenge. I think finding funding in the circular economy is a particular challenge. I mean, I really like programs like the ones William's describing, where there are efforts to get more structured funding out there to move these things forward. But a lot of times we will find investors that don't really understand what circular economy is, and we can go in a long discussion about how that actually affects us, because we get thrown into buckets that we don't quite fit in, and so they have wrong ideas about what we're trying to do. As well, we're growing right now. We're growing pretty quickly, and so we're hiring a lot of people. And so for me, one of my biggest focuses right now is trying to instill in all of these people coming into the organization a really deep understanding of what circular economy is, because there is a general understanding, but not a specific understanding. And I think as one example for us, we tout the idea that we take old socks, right? That when we work with a partner, we're buying back the entire flow. Anything you buy from this retailer, we're taking it back. Well, the whole idea of taking back old socks seems really counterintuitive, especially to anybody who's kind of thinking of traditional re-commerce businesses, where it's all kind of skim the cream, let's get the really expensive things, and we'll make some money off of those. You have to really understand the roots of circular economy to understand why taking the socks is so important.
Yeah.
Right? If you really want to habituate consumer behavior, if you really want to build data around all items and how those items are used, and basically push that data back up the chain for product design, for models that sell those in certain ways, and then ultimately making use of all the materials, not just selling the things that are really, really valuable. So all of those pieces are things that I feel really, it's imperative for me to kind of convey that to the team, and then all the different partners we work with, so that they understand how we're approaching this and why we're approaching it the way we are.
I think and I love the analogy of kind of like, how do we take back old socks? But you're working with some pretty high profile partners in that space, right?
Yes, we are.
So
a lot of socks out there.
A lot of socks out there, but it comes down again, I guess, to this disruptive business imperative for organizations that you're kind of working with. Mm-hmm. When you have those first conversations as a small business and I imagine your pitch is very well oiled now, but when you have those initial conversations, like whether it be with investors or with new partners, what are some of the biases that you come up against?
Well, I think first off, we're looking for players that already have some kind of internal initiative around this, right? I mean, if we go into a player that really has no interest whatsoever, that's just a hard sell. It's difficult to bring people from 0 up to 60. You've got to start at 20 or 30 miles an hour and take them from there. So if you take a player like Adidas, which is a great partner of ours, we launched with them with a service called Infinite Play last October. They had a very, very strong initiative internally around circular economy. They were developing a whole line of products called Futurecraft Loop that are completely recyclable products. And they really have a vision for trying to ultimately make their products be a supply chain for the next generation of products. And so we were able to tie into that vision in a sense, and just all the kind of corporate strategic elements that were pushing that. And that's just not only super helpful, it's really kind of required, right?
Yeah.
You can't really make it go if there's not some momentum that's already in place in those players. There are other areas of our business where it is a little bit more challenging. I mean, you look at the recycling side of the business, for example, and we can talk to traditional recyclers till we turn blue about how we need to figure out ways to actually make better use of these materials, but there's just not an infrastructure there to do that yet. And so we have to coax that forward. We have to basically present a vision for how using data around all these items where material components, all the different elements that are being brought to bear, you can actually begin to develop those markets and get into chemical recycling of textiles and things like that. So it's kind of on all fronts that we're really trying to push things forward.
And I guess when you talk about infrastructure, and I'm going to come to both you, Natalia, and William in a moment, because this is a challenge, right? Because there are so many, even if you take London as a city, 33 boroughs, there are so many different ways of accessing this material, processing this material. Natalia, where do you start when you're trying to support organizations like John with kind of unification of infrastructure? Yeah. Does it need to come from the European kind of level, or is it actually more at a kind of city agenda?
I think it's a bit of both. I think I would just build up on what John was saying on one of the key challenges we witness. Many of the businesses that want to do the right thing, they want to close material loops, keep materials and resources in circulation, is either lack of infrastructure. So I would if we look at the compostables markets, we have many companies that they're trying to put into the market compostable products, but there's not really an infrastructure to deal with them at the end. So then you have to question, is that actual compostable material ending where it should end and get back the nutrients from it, et cetera, et cetera. Same with in the fashion industry and the fashion sector. We have a lot of businesses that they go the extra mile to look at getting cleaner resources and cleaner feedstock to produce their products, let's say swimwear, et cetera. So you have the businesses that go and design products out of recycled polyester fibers, but then that supply chain is still in Asia. And so the environmental impact of shipping those materials from Asia to another European country, actually, where the sewing will happen, for finally ending up in London. So that whole infrastructure is not yet there. And it's a big question, do we leave it to the market to create it? Do we bring in policy incentives to make that happen? Is it at the national government level? I think everybody needs to play their part. But these are actual challenges that they are shared across, all the SMEs that we are supporting and helping. So that lack of infrastructure. And I think I mentioned to you the example of also technology might not be at that level or haven't actually translated to circular businesses. For example, a fashion apparel manufacturer was telling me the other day, so they are making maternity clothes, and he was literally saying, we are actually developing our own smart our QR codes for clothes, and we are building up a whole blockchain platform behind it. And I was like, wait, hold on a second. Are you a fashion brand or are you an IT software development company? And his reaction was, well, I have no other choice because that's not ready available yet. There's nobody who can actually has built it for me, and I need to build it from scratch.
Gosh, actually, I could help him.
Yes,
we are playing with that, doing some of that.
Then I started saying,
Yeah.
but do you know Stuffstr? Do you know?
Well, not us specifically, but there are players that are starting
exactly,
to do some of these
exactly.
things. Yeah.
So I think that's there are many businesses that they are trying to do the best they can. They try to aspire to circular principles, but there's still there are challenges around the system, the enabling system around it.
Yeah.
So, William, I saw you kind of nodding to when Natalia was talking there. I guess if we swing for a second towards policy and how that helps to enable some of these conditions that we need for system change, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was fascinated by the examples that John has given from his company, from Stuffstr, and I can maybe relate to a couple of those from a sort of European level. I mentioned regulation, I mentioned investment, and I mentioned the sort of convening power that we have at European level. And on all of those levels, I think that you could relate that to textiles. So, for example, on the regulatory level, our waste legislation will bring in an obligation for separate collection of textiles from 2025. So all municipalities will have to separately collect textiles by 2025. Then, of course, we have to think, what are they going to do with it? A lot of this will have to happen on a local level, of course, but we have our regional and structural funding programs, which are available to put money into that. If we talk about the innovation side, I'm sure that Natalia has heard of the urban agenda that we have. We have several cities that we've networked, and we're helping them to actually work on how cities can develop integrated structures, including on things like textiles. And then you also mentioned the digital aspect. And here, I mean, it's a big problem for SMEs. In general, only 17% of SMEs have adopted digital technologies, so compared to about 54% for bigger companies. What we need in order to enable things to happen is protocols and agreements along supply chains, so that we agree on what data has to be made available, and we agree on a way in which we can attach that information to a product, so we can kind of tag the product with QR codes, with RFID codes, with barcodes, with watermarks, with whatever tagging technology, so that we can link the data to the product through the supply chain. And in that way, you can overcome some of the split incentives, some of the problems which mean that the person who's now in possession of the assets, the goods, the products, the textiles, doesn't have an incentive to get the value and the money out of those, or that the person that's producing the textiles doesn't have an incentive to make sure that the person at the end of the line knows what's in those textiles, what kind of fibers and so on. So on all of those levels, I think there is a European angle. I mean, we need to bring in a European angle in creating the right framework in order for the individual entrepreneurial things to happen.
Excellent. Thanks, William. Whilst we've been sort of chatting, the questions have been coming in thick and fast, and the team are processing them behind the scenes. So I'm just going to throw a couple at you, if I may. Start one with you, William. This individual asks, are we working on developing a circular economic strategy to handle the plastic waste generated within Europe? And can you give an example, if any?
Well, plastics is an interesting example, because I mentioned before that we've had a legislative approach to policy, and then a more single market approach to policy. And many of our instruments related to single market or to consumer information are a little bit fragmented. They're very good, things like the eco-label and eco-design and so on. And what we want to do is bring those together, and in the Circular Economy Action Plan, which will be adopted tomorrow, we will be trying to make a more comprehensive approach. And the one way that we've done that so far has been in plastics. We adopted a plastics strategy a couple of years ago, which really looked at all points on the loop. So not just looking at increasing the collection and recycling of plastic, but also looking at increasing recycled content, getting companies to pledge to increase the amount of recycled content in their products, investing in better recycling technologies and so on. And looking forward, I think that the real challenges will be on how we deal with bioplastics, biodegradable plastics, and microplastics, and particularly how we implement the restrictions and bans that we imposed on certain single-use plastics. So we still have quite a lot of work to do on plastics, and I think that the focus of that moving forward will be on prevention of single-use plastics where they're not needed, where there are good alternatives available, and on how we deal with problems of intentionally added microplastics and non-intentional microplastics, so things coming from tire dust and also from fabric, from synthetic fabrics and so on.
Perfect. Thanks, William. I want to pivot there if I can and come to you, Natalia, because something that both you and John mentioned before, and William's point there, that there's a learning component to this around understanding what circular economy means. In the work that you do in the City of London, I can imagine that when you're working with organisations such as John's, where circular economy is baked in the heart of what they do, it's a really easy conversation to have. But what about when you're talking to those organisations that have got a more linear history and trying to, they may get the high level concept, but how do you work with that?
It's a really good point, really good question, James. I think that is where we feel we are innovating the most as, let's say, the London Waste and Recycling Board, in the sense that we bring the concept of the circular economy and the circular principles closer to people and businesses that they would have never heard probably about it, and they would be missing out on a really interesting business proposition. The way we engage with these businesses, we always try to figure out what's the best language. We don't have a really magic recipe. So you always have the trade-off. Do I use the word circular economy so I raise awareness over the term? Or do I just, go back to resource efficiency and being a green business so they can immediately understand what you're talking about, but then, get the first foot in the door and start the conversation. We have, I'm really happy and proud to say that we have enough of these businesses in our portfolio, and we are hand-holding them through the process of either they look at how their packaging can be more circular, how their actual products can be more circular. We start seeing some of the fruits of our work for the past 3 years. We have a perfume manufacturer in London who has launched a refillable bottle, and it's actually working really well. We have a jewelry handmade jewelry manufacturer who made modular jewelry for their clients, and apparently it has given them a really nice competitive advantage and has set them apart from their competition. It's also still though small scale, so we are trying to collect that evidence that for a business it does make sense to become circular. We know it. We know that we aspire from the corporates that they are trying to implement all these initiatives. We know it from the businesses that they have launched on a circular DNA basis. So then we are trying to bring that closer to also the more let's say unaware conventional businesses like hotels, restaurants, apparel manufacturers. So we're trying to figure out what's the best recipe there. And depending on the sector we are talking or the industry we're talking, we are usually different language. We are using different people to influence and resonate with that market. For example, in the food sector, we are about to launch a guide on how to be a circular food business. So we stay tuned actually, because we were supposed to launch it, but because of coronavirus, we postponed the event. But it should happen in the next months. And what we did there is we collated all the evidence from restaurants across London that they are taking circularity measures in the core of their operation that have demonstrated cost savings, increased market share, etc. And we have used, let's say, Michelin star award-winning chefs to be our spokesperson and our ambassadors. So depending on the sector, we are experimenting with different messages and different stories.
I think there's something really important in that as well. Like depending on your audience, depends on the down to the language you need to use. You know, when you are engaging with CEOs and board members versus your project managers, the guys and girls on the shop floor. Your point there about how do you make that resonate, and I think there's something also quite important about you don't necessarily have to stick vehemently to the terms. It's about the concepts. Why are we doing this? Because of these number of reasons, but it doesn't necessarily have to be called circular economy. It's more about the principles of what we're trying to do.
Discussions with retailers that, have progressed over years in our case of really kind of bringing them along. But, if we were actually trying to create some circular product, then supply chains would be enormously important to us, right? It really depends on what business you're trying to get into. But I do think it has to start internally. It has to start at the core. It has to be within your own organization that everybody is on the same page with the same understanding and then moving that forward.
So you could almost say aspirationally, you have to know what good looks like for your own organization from a circular economic standpoint. Before making those decisions about how we do this or where we hire people, it's actually what are you trying to achieve?
Well, I think it's enormously beneficial to have a vision. To know what North Star you're trying to focus on and follow, and to be able to have everybody in an organization understand that star, right? I mean, I think for Stuffstr, it was all very straightforward. No unused stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, that is a galvanizing statement, and it really directs what we do. It directs who we work with. It directs all aspects of our business. And I think that's really, really important, and is the starting point for really any successful company that wants to move into this area.
We've talked quite a bit about the challenges, be that through the right policy, the right investment, even just having access to the right infrastructure. What about then some of the more successful sides of the argument? I mean, you mentioned before, it's all about proving the success stories. And I think, certainly from our perspective as a foundation, this is very much about identifying those success stories, whether they be large organizations or small. Can either of you here in the studio sort of talk to that a little bit? John, I mean, from your perspective, you've been doing this for a number of years now, and I'm sure you've been blooded like along the way.
Yes, right.
But still, you have a growing business that works with some really impressive partners. There must be something that's kind of given you an edge there around your conventional linear counterparts.
Well, I mean, I think the edge we bring is the edge of the circular economy. I just think, fundamentally, what we're proposing makes not only environmental sense, but it's just a tremendous business opportunity. And if we're dealing with retailers, the whole model of retailing for the last several decades is really pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
To invite people into your store, convince them to buy something, and then stand at the door and literally wave goodbye, right? No connection with what you've sold them, no help, no assistance in what's happening after the sale. So, so I think that, that's just kind of how we, it's how we look at things, right? It's how we change things. And so that dialogue is, it's gone on a long time.
Do you find when you say talk to the impact investment community, and you mentioned before about putting in the wrong bucket, the people like the idea of investing in companies that say they do sort of circular economy, but there's still that component around understanding what it really means from a investment perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'd say there's a fairly big gap in most cases, right? You have a few funds out there like Circularity Capital where, you got the founder was the original CEO here at the MacArthur Foundation, so it's pretty good pedigree. But by and large, there's a inchoate understanding, right? There's a fascination, there's an intrigue, but there's not really an understanding of the dynamics and how that all works. And so from the standpoint of an SME that's trying to raise funding, the question is, do you try to imbue them with that understanding, or do you just say, forget that, I'll go find Circularity Capital and work with them, right? Yeah. I mean, are you going to try to move that part forward? And and that's by and large, I think you really need to, because you need funding from a variety of sources, and a number of those sources are not going to have that fundamental understanding. I think even on the grant side, I think we'd probably see that. I mean, it's a question for William, but I think really understanding how this is being implemented on the ground is, apart from the high level concepts, it can be pretty different when you're actually down there at ground level.
Yeah. And I guess, Natalia, then you know, that's one story from John there, but you see multiple organizations through the initiatives that you have. What are your sort of reflections on that?
I mean, it's a very positive picture, and I think,
Good.
honestly, I'm really proud to be able to say that we have just in London, and maybe just in that they are in the network and outreach of the London Waste and Recycling Board and Advanced London. We have around 200 SMEs that we have supported in the past 3 years, of which, like, if I was doing some quick calculations to see what evidence I can bring to the table today, and we have their total turnover is around 12 million pounds. It sounds small, but like it is a significant amount of money. It's not an insignificant sum. It's a starting point that we could help, let's say, grow and look at investors and say, look, this is a starting base. Half of them are generating revenue already. How can we make this portfolio worth 100 million, you know, and work with them towards unveiling some of the risks that there are around their business models. And hopefully we think that this is part of our role as well. And that's why we hold regular meet the investor events to broker relations between the SMEs that we have really done our thorough due diligence, and we feel comfortable to bring forward to investors and then educate investors on, like, these are not just your regular businesses. These are like people who think outside the box, who think 10, 15 years ahead of their time. So we're trying to do that. And I mean, we have all of these businesses together have generated around 900 jobs just for London. Like, maybe it sounds small, but like 900 jobs, I challenge anyone to create 900 jobs in the last 2 years. And those businesses have done it. We have been witnessing it daily. John is hiring. There are so many other companies that are hiring as we speak, and that's an amazing news elements for the circular economy discussion. There are a lot of opportunities because there are resources everywhere. So wherever you see a consumption point, wherever you see a shop or something, there is always a circular economy opportunity there for somebody with an entrepreneurial hat on to go and address that. There's a lot of food waste out there. There are a lot of electronics that they are pumped into our market every year. I think we did a recent study, and we have around 230,000 tons of electronic waste being purchased in London alone every year, of which I think around 90,000 are then kind of collected separately, and they don't end up in a bad place. So there are opportunities wherever you look around. There are resources popping up. There is an opportunity for circular economy, circular businesses. It's as simple as that. And it is happening. It's amazing. It's fascinating.
So it is just about finding the right innovative opportunity, the right disruptive process to access these resources.
Yes. And I have to say that the businesses that will succeed are the businesses that they are, usually we see a lot of entrepreneurs, they come with so much passion. They want to save the world and change a specific challenge they have seen, but they forget to validate the solution they bring forward with the market and the competitors that exist out there already implementing a solution. So the entrepreneurs, that they will be really honest to themselves. Is this a right idea? Be open to partners like us and other entrepreneurs, peers, and just put their idea on the table and say, is this the right thing? Is this, bulletproof? Will it actually bring the impact that it needs to bring? Then those are the entrepreneurs who will succeed, and we will have, this really successful case studies to share with the world that circular businesses do bring the change we want. So
you just got to get out there and do it.
So just be open to share. I mean, in always within the limit of confidentiality, and there's always the business protection element. But I think that just be honest with yourself. I want to change this in the world I see. Is this the right way? And if that's the right way, do my customers believe that that's the right way? Is anybody else doing that out there? That's my
Excellent.
advice.
There we go. There's the blueprint. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I'm pretty sure we could keep talking about this for a lot longer. And there's certainly a lot more questions that we haven't got to. But I want to start to kind of draw it to a close with a little bit around how do you, all three of you individually, look forward now to 2020? I was told the other day, someone gave me an anecdote the other day, that this dialogue has never moved as quickly as it moved in 2019. and it will never move that slowly again. So as we set up for a new decade in 2020, what are the areas that you're going to be focusing on this year to help you with your respective ambitions? So start with you, William. You've already sort of talked a little bit about what's coming tomorrow and all the busy stuff and great stuff that you've been doing at the European Commission. But actually, what's high on your agenda for 2020?
Well, the agenda is being set by what is being adopted today and tomorrow. The great thing for us is the European Green Deal, which has really shown that there is an understanding now at the very top level, and I'm meaning the European Commission's new president and the commissioners, of the importance of circular economy and the importance of a Green Deal for the people who were voting in the last European elections. We've just reached the 100 days mark now in the new European Commission, which is why we're coming forward with all of these new initiatives. So the challenge for us will be to implement those. And because the Commission will last with the current commissioners for 5 years, the first couple of years are really the key ones. So I would suggest that anybody that wants to get a bit more detail, if we only have 5 minutes now, they should look at the SME strategy, which we adopted today, which shows how it commits us to bringing in our 600 Enterprise Europe network hubs, sustainability advisors and people that can advise local businesses going to those hubs, decentralized hubs on circularity. It announces 300 million euros for innovative projects related to the European Green Deal in 2020. It announces cooperation between our knowledge and innovation centres on circular economy. It announces a green tech investment initiative for equity investment, because I think 90% of SMEs are financed by the bank, and we're lacking in Europe that equity side. So if you want to get more information on that, look at our SME strategy, which was adopted today. And if you want to understand what we're going to do for the circular economy, look out tomorrow. Use your search engine to look for the Circular Economy Action Plan. There is an annex to it, if you don't want to read the whole thing, which will set out in a couple of pages the actions for the next 5 years. And as I say, many of those are for 2020, 2021. As already made clear, we will have strategies on built environment and construction, on textiles, on information and communication technologies, sustainable products policy. We'll be particularly looking at some of the enablers, like particularly the digital enablers. We'll be looking at chemicals, the problems of legacy chemicals in the loops, and toxic chemicals. We'll be looking at what we need in terms of finance. So all of that, I think, will become very clear tomorrow, and then we will have our work cut out to actually do it. It was quite challenging to actually prepare everything, but the real challenge will be actually delivering it. And I hope that we'll be able to, in each of those areas, have a real debate with the stakeholders at all parts of the value chain, and we'll be able to actually move circular economy from being something which is very much the disruptors to something which becomes the norm, something which is mainstreamed. What you were just saying now about, I think your last question was asking, John, how you would advise, where to start in making an SME circular if it's not sort of a new disruptive SME. Well, we did a survey asking SMEs, we call it a Eurobarometer, and we asked SMEs if they had done anything circular, and 73% of SMEs said yes. And we're talking about mainstream SMEs. Now, I'm pretty sure that those SMEs are all talking about resource efficiency.
Yeah.
I think that it's very clear what they need to do, because they can save energy, they can sell byproducts and waste and so on. They can find ways of using materials more efficiently. But getting to circularity, I think, is an extra step, and I think we need to try and make that the norm as well, to actually see how we can extract more value from materials and assets as they go through our economies.
Well, William, it sounds like the work all starts tomorrow and you've got a long road ahead of you. Really quickly, sorry, 5 seconds, John, 2020, what's on the head mark?
Well, for us, it's all about scaling.
Scaling.
Right? So it's we opened up a German subsidiary recently. We're expanding over from the UK into Europe. Ultimately, want to get to the States. We have a lot of plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Natalia?
Well, for us, it's pilots. So we are really look forward to getting to the next step with some of the conventional businesses and launch pilots in like leasing models, take-back schemes, businesses that are interested or willing to design like their products in a different way, in a circular way, in a modular way. We invite those businesses that are, if they're London-based, to get in touch and help us create that evidence that it actually works.
Excellent. Well, William, John, Natalia, thank you very much for
James.
a very quick but comprehensive dive into small businesses and how they enable the circular economy. I hope you enjoyed that. If you do want to find out more, do get in contact with us through the normal channels. Thanks very much for watching and look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye-bye.